તાજા સમાચાર તમારી ભાષામાં મેળવવા માટે ડાઉનલોડ કરો ગુજરાતી મિડ ડેની એપ.
Prime Minister's conversation with US President Biden on the situation in Bangladesh, the need to restore law and order and stability, but also to ensure that there are no incidents of violence against minorities in Bangladesh, especially Hindus. The situation obviously is quite serious for the Prime Minister to take it up. There are atrocities happening against minorities and Hindus in particular. The US leverage on Bangladesh has increased, post the exit of Hasina, and possibly, if you can infer from that, the scope of US intervening in a positive way, and they're in sync with us because it's this is something that I'm sure both sides agreed to, that we move in tandem to work on the situation in Bangladesh in a positive manner. The US might have leverage on certain sections there, including Chief Advisor Mohammed Yunus himself. So that is, I think, what we can extrapolate from this conversation.
PM Modi and Biden had a telephonic conversation, and where PM briefed him about his the recent Ukraine visit. So how do you see this, the conversation, the discussion between both the leaders?
Well, Prime Minister had a historic visit to Ukraine. This is the first visit by a Prime Minister of India to Ukraine. And it was also not just bilateral, but there was a strong component of peace building in this entire visit, because Prime Minister Modi went with the intention of extending all cooperation to restore peace and stability in Ukraine through diplomacy and dialogue. And at that time, I had also commented that it is definitely we can really definitely say that Prime Minister and the government have kept our major partners informed of his visits, both to Moscow and Ukraine. And when he visited Ukraine, I think we would have kept the United States, our friends in Europe, as well as Russia, informed of the visit. And on his return, the Prime Minister's call to President Biden assumed significance, because in his call he has covered quite extensively his effort at restoring, peace and stability, his talks with President Zelensky, and his vision of how, conflict can be, I would say, substituted through dialogue and diplomacy into peace and stability. So I think these are very, very important factors. And I think President Biden on his part also noted that the Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine was very helpful. The US State Department called it potentially helpful. In other words, that the efforts that India is making have been useful and could lead to a potential, sort of positive outcomes in more ways than one. He also appreciated the humanitarian assistance. As President Biden appreciated the humanitarian assistance extended by India to Ukraine. As you know, India has extended 16 different tranches of humanitarian assistance, pharmaceuticals, blankets, tents, all sorts of things that are needed by Ukraine. President Biden talks about energy, assistance in the energy sector. That's interesting, because that did not figure in the Prime Minister's statement issued after the talk. My own sense is there was some talk of reconstruction. In Ukraine's reconstruction, the energy sector, especially transmission lines, power plants, etc., have been very badly affected. Possibly, this we can only extrapolate because we are only seeing what is in the public domain. Possibly, the Prime Minister has offered to provide reconstruction assistance, especially in the power sector, where India has a fair amount of expertise in laying transmission lines, in constructing and reconstructing power plants, etc. So I can only construe that President Biden's reference to energy, India's assistance to Ukraine in the energy sector, is that. I mean, there could be other interpretations also, but possibly it is definitely some form of assistance that Prime Minister offered to Ukraine in the energy sector.
So after the Ukraine visit, they even discussed the atrocities happening in Bangladesh on Hindus, basically. So how do you see this? Like, do you feel that US can help and can play like an aid in stopping the atrocities on Hindus in Bangladesh?
I think by this particular readout regarding Prime Minister's conversation with US President Biden on the situation in Bangladesh, the need to restore law and order and stability, but also to ensure that there are no incidents of violence against minorities in Bangladesh, especially Hindus. And in that context, I think there are two sort of conclusions we can draw from that. One is that the situation obviously is quite serious for the Prime Minister to take it up. There are atrocities happening against minorities and Hindus in particular in Bangladesh. And the second is that the US leverage on Bangladesh has increased, post the exit of Hasina, and possibly, if you can infer from that, the scope of US intervening in a positive way, and they're in sync with us because it's this is something that I'm sure both sides agreed to, that we move in tandem to work on the situation in Bangladesh in a positive manner. I mean, it's not negative. It is that when you restore peace and stability, you restore law and order, you also decrease the salience of violence against any vulnerable groups in that country, and minorities are the most vulnerable groups, and they're targeted by radical Islamic elements like the Jamaat-e-Islami and certain sections of the BNP as well. So I think that factor has to be kept in mind, and the US might have leverage on certain sections there, including Chief Advisor Mohammed Yunus himself. So that is, I think, what we can extrapolate from this conversation.
So, what kind of impact do you see, like after PM's visit? What kind of impact it can have on the India and US ties?
I think what is very clear is that Prime Minister has paid tribute to President Biden for taking that relationship significantly forward. I think we cannot forget that it was President Biden who started the first Quad summit. Quad was first at official level, then at foreign minister's level, but it's under President Biden that we are the first Quad summit, first virtually in March 2020 and then in person in September 2021. So in a certain sense, that relationship has been taken qualitatively forward, both bilaterally and through the Quad. It also has to be recalled that President Biden invited Prime Minister Modi for all of the major summits he hosted on democracy, sustainable development, climate change, the priorities that the US outlined under his presidency. He wanted Prime Minister Modi to be part of those discussions. And the contribution and the value addition from Prime Minister Modi and from India was very significant in all of those discussions that took place. So, in a certain sense, that was I would say the subtext of what the conversation was about. He was thanking President Biden for keeping the relationship on track, attaching value to the relationship, providing a focus on the Indo-Pacific, and also there was discussion from what I can see on the UN General Assembly, for which Prime Minister is expected to visit New York in September. Possible meetings in the margins of the UNGA, possible Quad summit also on the margins of the UNGA. So some of these discussions did take place. When will the next Quad summit take place? Possibly in New York. Then will it be India's turn to host it after that? That these are things that we will have to wait and see. But some of the discussions might have been in that context.
So, just the last question, like how India has taken stand, like we want peace, and with diplomacy, India is trying to go forward. So, do you see India becoming a global leader to which the other countries might follow?
I think India is already a global leader. India is, acknowledged to articulate the voice of the global South. Developing countries have a lot of faith and confidence in Prime Minister Modi's global leadership and India's role in the world today. So from a country that has been responsive and reactive to international events, today we are proactive. We are setting the agenda. It is our initiatives. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, one earth, one family, one future, was India's theme in its G20 presidency. And that was reflected in the G20 outcome document, which was adopted by consensus by all G20 nations. This is our approach to the world. It is our approach on peace and amity, working for the global common good. Prime Minister's concept of, humanitarian intervention in a positive way, human-centric globalization, as he calls it. And of course, Prime Minister's focus on working with all others to try and bring about, realize our goal of peace and stability through dialogue and diplomacy, as you mentioned. I mean, this is not an era of conflict, the Prime Minister said. So these thoughts are permeating the global thinking today. And I think it is these thoughts that will really save mankind from the sort of abyss that we are moving into. The world has become an uncertain place. Global conflicts are increasing, and someone has to step in there to say that, look, let sanity prevail. Let us bring things under control. I mean, there is so much flux that we need to really step back and try and talk things over and try and work in amity and cooperation rather than in conflict and through violence.
સબસ્ક્રાઇબ કરો ગુજરાતી મિડડે. બેલ આઇકોન પર ક્લિક કરીને મેળવો તમામ વિડીયોના ડાયરેક્ટ નોટિફિકેશન.